Hey now, RotoGrinders, welcome back for week 3 of NFL preseason DFS. My name is Chris Gimino. I'm joined by Kyle Murray, and we are going to break down a pretty pathetic 2-game slate here on DraftKings and FanDuel. Kyle, this particular slate is not exciting in a number of different ways. I don't want to even get into some of the depths of what we're going to see at tight end, but just in general, week 3 of the preseason has devolved into something a little bit more bizarre than even week 4 of the preseason used to be in years past, because you have this weird mix of some teams treating it differently than others. It used to be just everyone played their worst players on week 4. Now we get a little bit of a mix here and there. How are we going to deal with this as we get through this weekend of what should be a pretty hectic news weekend?
Yeah, definitely. I think this week compared to last, I at least like the way that they kind of broke this week down. We have the 4-game slate on Friday, so make sure you guys are staying tuned for all that content and projections for that slate as well. And then the bigger Saturday slate as well. But last week it was kind of all just backloaded to that Saturday. So it should be a pretty good slate of games this weekend. But, like you mentioned, this particular 2-game slate, not a ton of great options. We will get the chance to talk about Jackson Dart quite a bit, which is somewhat exciting. But for the most part, there are some pretty unorthodox options throughout the position players tier. So we'll break that down as we go.
There is a I believe an MVP on this slate, so we can at least talk about that as well, because not everybody in this particular slate is unawarded. We do have an MVP that we have to talk about here. So let's get to it. At the quarterback position, Jackson Dart was somewhat highly touted coming out of college. Definitely was receiving higher grades than I think most people initially thought he would in the pre-draft process. Ended up looking pretty good in a pretty weak field of quarterbacks this year. A lot of people liked his blend of skills as it pertains to the pro game. That seems to have translated pretty well so far in preseason play. Very productive for the Giants so far, looks the part. The Giants are not rushing him into the starting lineup as a lot of quarterbacks are. They're pretty committed to the Russell Wilson is going to be our starter, and I'm not even sure they're committed to Jackson Dart being the next man up with Jameis Winston on the roster, them refusing to trade Jameis Winston. So to me, everything is lining up here for Jackson Dart to play quite a lot in this game. I realize Tommy DeVito still walks among us and lives and breathes. The prop markets over on the Pick'em sites are still giving DeVito a fairly healthy prop. I think I'm prepared to take the under on that, Kyle. I think it looks like it's going to be Jackson Dart for at least half this game, if not a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, there's really no reason for the Giants to not give as many snaps as they deem necessary or possible for Dart here. Like you mentioned, he is probably not even going to be the backup during the regular season, with Jameis Winston being in town, obviously Russell Wilson being the starter. Jackson Dart is clearly in that, seemingly Patrick Mahomes rookie stage where he's just going to be the guy able to learn as much as possible while he's getting these preseason reps and, off-season time, developing his skill set and kind of seeing what they have with him there. So this strikes me as the perfect chance to see as much Jackson Dart as possible. So right now we have him as clearly the majority playing time quarterback for the Giants here. And I honestly wouldn't even be surprised if he plays maybe even the full game. I don't think that's even outside of the realm of possibilities here, even though, like you mentioned, we are still seeing some props here for Tommy DeVito. But, I mean, this is a spot where Jackson Dart's probably going to start. And, who knows how deep he can work into this game, but he should seemingly be the quarterback to get the most playing time. And also, we've seen some upside from him throughout the preseason as well. He's already thrown for 291 yards on 35 attempts, including 2 touchdowns. So he's been a pretty solid producer in preseason as well. So playing time and production should lead to pretty good things for Dart this week.
Yeah, beat writers have been bullish on his particular amount of playing time this week. I realize that is just their speculation as opposed to ours, or as opposed to anyone else's. No coaches have actually come out and said, this is the split of that we're going to see this week. But it does seem to make a lot of sense that Dart should be getting quite a lot of work this week. DeVito might play a little bit more than the 6% he played last week. He did play 23% in the first week. So, yeah, I would lean the direction towards what he played in that first week versus what he played last week, but still not going to play anywhere close to enough to get us disinterested in Jackson Dart against what should be quite a lot of the deeper players on the New England Patriots defense. Let's get into the options on the New England Patriots at quarterback, though. I think both of these guys have a reasonable case for playing a lot in this game. It's Joshua Dobbs, who is not even solidified as the backup quarterback at this point. Hasn't played all that well, but Kyle, I'm not even sure I know what a Ben Woolridge is. I mean, I've seen him play. I've looked him up as we've gone through this process here in the preseason, but certainly nothing is standing out to me as anything to get excited about. Do you have anything that can get us excited about playing New England Patriots quarterbacks?
Yeah, I mean, as someone who backed the Patriots last week on the money line, Joshua Dobbs is someone who has earned some favor in my heart. Threw for about 100 yards. He didn't even play too much last week. Threw 106 yards on 16 attempts and a touchdown. Woolridge didn't have a great week 2 preseason game, but in that week 1 preseason game against Washington, he did have his pretty solid production. 12 attempts, 132 yards on 12 attempts is not something you're going to see very often in the preseason streets, especially from somebody who is currently a third string quarterback on their roster. Did also have a touchdown in that game as well. These two should probably split time in this one, which I think if we had to give the benefit of the doubt on one of the players' production, I'd probably side with Dobbs, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Woolridge maybe creep into that playing time a little bit more. Dobbs was cut off short at halftime last week, and we saw Woolridge play the entire second half. So clearly this is a spot where we know what Josh Dobbs is, right? We've seen him around the league for 8 or 9 years at least. So wouldn't be surprised to see Woolridge maybe get into the playing time a little bit more. But again, I do think if we're going to be looking at efficiency, Dobbs probably has the edge there.
Over to the Carolina Panthers, where we do have one player who is not an MVP in Jack Plummer, and one player who is in Bryce Perkins. The problem is Bryce Perkins was literally just signed to this team. We don't know the context of that signing, and we certainly can't come out of the box screaming with a projection that says he's going to play like a super significant amount of time. We do have quotes from the coaches that state, Andy Dalton's been banged up and is probably not going to go here. That leaves the door open for a pretty significant run from Jack Plummer. The question is how much, and do we get enough Bryce Perkins to make it even something we can consider? Because frankly, if he was playing a lot, we would almost for sure be considering him up there as a top play.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a spot where, I was crossing my fingers hoping that we saw maybe some sort of Bryce Perkins and Dave Canales path, intersection throughout time in the NFL. I mean, Perkins has been bouncing around different leagues over the last few years. And obviously, Canales was back there in Tampa Bay, now with Carolina, but no luck there. So it is probably going to be difficult to see Bryce Perkins step into a ton of snaps here. But and even if they do, it's probably going to be a pretty limited playbook. But I mean, when you're talking about the back half of a preseason game, sometimes you can still make some things happen, especially with a guy who has shown that he can certainly be capable of producing. Whether that can translate to NFL preseason, we will see. But like you mentioned with that that nail biter at the beginning, I'm sure that people were waiting to hear who that MVP was. But yeah, Bryce Perkins with the Michigan Panthers. So got to give him his props as he deserves. But dual threat guy. So again, if we can see him play even a quarter and a half, I would not be. Not necessarily a high bar to set here, but if he can play a quarter and a half or a quarter, I would not be surprised to see him outscore Jack Plummer here. But again, probably difficult for him to necessarily compare, especially from a projection standpoint, to some of these other quarterbacks who are just projecting for more time and solid production.
Yeah, you talk about playing the back half of a preseason game. Between playing the back half of a preseason game when he was with the Rams into the UFL, where that's basically an entire season of playing the back half of a preseason game, to now that's what his run's going to be here. He's pretty used to it. So, I mean, whatever, you can extrapolate the production pretty safely across on his per quarter basis, and it wouldn't be that bad. So it's not the dumbest play, but also you do prefer to play people who have more secure playing time than what you're going to see from Bryce Perkins. He does have a rushing skill set, which is something that's not necessarily something you can say for a lot of guys on this list here. When you talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers, what we're talking about is Will Howard is out. We're talking about Aaron Rodgers has been ruled out. We're talking about Mason Rudolph, who is extremely familiar with the situation here in Pittsburgh, not to mention the fact that he's played in both games so far, roughly a quarter or so. No mention of him playing any particular depth in this game, and Tomlin has said everyone who's healthy is going to play, but as mentioned, he may base who is playing and how much by what the Panthers are going to do, and unfortunately the Panthers are playing some pretty deep reserves here. So how much are you expecting from Rudolph, and is it going to be another game of 50-60% Skylar Thompson?
Yeah, for me, I'm not expecting too much from Rudolph. I mean, for all the reasons you kind of outlined, where Tomlin sort of alluded to matching sort of the energy that the Panthers are bringing with the key players that they're throwing out there. And while Mason Rudolph might not necessarily be a key player down the line, he's probably going to be the backup. While obviously Will Howard also develops here for the Steelers, so he could easily get the quick boot here. And I honestly wouldn't even be surprised if come game day we just get news that he's just not playing at all. But although with the majority of these starters at least having an opportunity to play for the Steelers, I do think Rudolph at least plays a little bit, but I'd be pretty surprised to see him play a ton. So I do think it's going to be once again the Skylar Thompson show. He's been pretty productive so far this preseason. I think he is amongst the league leaders in preseason passing yards so far this season with 346 passing yards on 43 attempts and 3 touchdowns. Also does have some rushing upside. Haven't seen it as much in this preseason, but obviously new system, new team, probably pulling back on that a bit. But dating back to his college days, was a guy who has been known to run and maybe sometimes even run too early. But I certainly think he's probably the guy sticking out to me most as somebody who could be a tournament option behind the certainly popular Jackson Dart. And I do think Josh Dobbs will also have some ownership as well.
Yep. So it does seem pretty clear, though, that Dart is among the top options. I wouldn't call anybody a runaway here. We've got Dobbs, Thompson, and Plummer as the guys we expect to play pretty much the most for their respective teams. And then you've got some shot plays with Woolridge and Perkins, but not a super exciting slate overall. It is exciting to maybe click the button on Jackson Dart, which is something we haven't really been able to do with all that much confidence so far. Over to the running back position, who are we looking to get into our rosters in week number 2 here? I do seem some more familiar names here.
Yeah, I think running back is a kind of a tricky spot here for this one, just because there's some guys who have some injury stuff that are potentially leading to question marks, and then maybe just some news to follow in the running back rooms leading up to lock. So again, make sure you guys are staying up to date to updated projections, and obviously our core play article, and then in our Discord as well. But the guy top, our running back projection is somebody with a little bit of volatility here on the projection, just because of Cam Scadabow's news. But Dante Miller, who's had pretty solid volume throughout the course of the preseason, hasn't necessarily been super efficient, but 15 carries, 2.6 yards per attempt. So maybe me saying he hasn't been super efficient is me being generous to Dante Miller, who I think goes by Dante Turbo Miller, which the efficiency might not be great, but the nickname is pretty cool. But the news here is Cam Scadabow was eventually going to get back here in the preseason action this week. Returned to practice yesterday. We're recording this on the 20th, so returned to practice on the 19th. Been dealing with that hamstring injury that's kept him out of pretty much everything the last couple of weeks, which is not good for a guy who was a mid-round draft pick and eventually trying to work into a role where he could eat into RB1 type workload, but that is not going to be the case, at least early on in the season, with that being the issue popping up with the hamstring. But I do think if Cam Scadabow is healthy enough to see a good workload here, I think they have all the reason in the world to see how he's adjusting to the playbook, how he's adjusting to the offense, what he can do on the field. So I do think there's kind of a two sides to the sword here for Scadabow. It's okay that he's either going to be limited and just trying to get out there because he hasn't been able to throughout the offseason and OTAs and training camp, or he's good to go now, and this is going to be his game, right, where he hasn't played at all in the preseason, hasn't been there in training camp, so now they're going to finally be able to unleash him. If that's the case, I think Scadabow is probably going to make a case for being one of, if not the best running back plays on the slate, but he's also going to be a guy that comes with plenty of ownership because everybody knows that name. Everybody saw what he did last year in the college football playoffs, so I think it's definitely going to be a game theory decision here for Scadabow, and hopefully we get at least a little bit of clarity with some news leading up to lock.
I think Miller will be the chalk for sure. I don't think Scadabow is going to gather as much ownership just because he's been out for weeks, right? And because people know him. It is the third game of the preseason. People will expect this run to be a little bit more limited. I do think that there is some confidence you can take in the fact that he was right back into team drills. They didn't ease him back in, but full contact football is a little bit different than even full contact team drills. So there is something to be said for being a little bit cautious with Cam Scadabow. We don't even actually really know if he's any good yet. I mean, it looks like he might be pretty good in the passing game for sure. He does have a lot of skills that come with him from the college ranks. There are a lot of people who are high on him, but again, for the most part, we haven't really seen him. So in a Giants uniform. So I think that's going to be interesting here, is if we actually get to see this guy on tape here before the season starts, especially for our best ball and redraft, rankings. It's going to be interesting to check out these Giants. Now, okay, let's get into another rookie that everyone's talking about, Caleb Johnson. So you do have the Steelers almost surely going to not run Jalen Warren into the ground here. Again, probably going to mimic the flow of the Panthers. Maybe we'll see them. Tomlin does tend to give the players who aren't 50 years old a little bit of run in the preseason. He's not afraid to do that. Jalen Warren could certainly do that, but I would suggest that it's probably going to be less of our key players here in this game, more run to the younger players and low-end depth chart players on the Steelers. And Caleb Johnson, Kyle, is that somebody that we can trust for volume?
Yeah, I think Caleb Johnson could benefit from volume as well as efficiency-wise, just playing with guys who are a little bit better. I mean, you can make a case that Caleb Johnson might not play much with the first team group here on offense, but he has led this team in carries by quite a large margin. 19 carries, next closest is 9. So they've made a very clear effort to try to get him carries. So I think the only thing really standing in the way of Caleb Johnson continuing to get more work after he's had a pretty disappointing camp from pretty much all reports and all accounts throughout that locker room and the beat writers there in Pittsburgh. The only thing they can get in the way of that volume repeating here is Jalen Warren or Kenny Gainwell coming in and getting a lot of work. And I just don't see that being quite the case. I mean, I know we are going to see some starters here, but Aaron Rodgers isn't going to play. DK Metcalf's not going to play. I do think that they'll probably roll Warren and Gainwell out there for a little bit, but I'd be surprised if it's any more than a few drives here. And then after that, I wouldn't be surprised to see Caleb Johnson play the majority of the remainder of the game. So I do think Caleb Johnson is in for a good amount of work once again here, and we haven't really seen a ton of great efficiency. I know we had a couple of long runs in that week 2 game, but I just don't know that we're going to continue to see him average, less than 4 yards per carry, especially against second and third stringers. I do think Caleb Johnson's still a good prospect and a good player. So I think we'll continue to see him improve on an efficiency basis as well. And as long as Warren and Gainwell aren't playing a bunch here, I do think Caleb Johnson's going to have volume once again.
Yeah, on bigger slates, certainly the stronger plays, like the sharper plays, we're going to count the bodies and see who has to play, right? Versus who they want to play. Well, you can still count 6 people who get into the ball game for the Steelers here. So it's not necessarily like Caleb Johnson has to play, but you would expect him to play enough on a slate of this size to matter. And that's where I think you can start to like him on a slate that's this thin. Now, on the Patriots, I think that's where you can play that game a little bit. You can play the who's actually going to be out there game, because they're probably not going to play the start. Ramondre Stevenson just got back to practice. Like, he's not going out there. He was in a non-contact jersey. Maybe a carry, 2 carries. You cannot expect him to play a lot. Travion Henderson, I think they haven't even really been playing him a lot anyway. He's been producing quite a bit when he plays, but it's not like he's been out there for tons of snaps, 13% and 11% in consecutive weeks. Maybe you could expect that at the most. You got Antonio Gibson, who is veteran, similar kind of playing time available for him. Don't expect to see a whole lot of him. Terrell Jennings did not practice. 8-19, what is that leaving us? Well, you've got 2 guys who've been signed in the last 2 consecutive weeks, and the long-term veteran on this team, as far as this season goes, he's been here for 3 weeks, JaMychal Hasty. I think that's the place we're going to be looking here for a lot of touches here in this game. Like I said, Micah Bernard just signed. Shane Watts was a week ago. Hasty was a couple weeks ago. I think that's probably the safest bet for touches, which is saying something.
Yeah, I mean, Hasty and Watts both stepped in right away and handled a good amount of volume, right? Hasty had 11 carries last week. Watts had 10 carries for a whopping 15 yards. Thank you, Shane Watts, for the successful production there. Hasty's always been a pretty productive runner when he's been on the field, and we've seen him with the Patriots in previous seasons. So obviously there's a new regime here, but I think considering he stepped in last week and was 11 for 47 on the ground, I have no problem, assuming that Hasty's going to be one of the more popular running backs on the slate, and for good reason, especially if we do get word that any of these top 3 or 4 running backs on the depth chart are going to be sitting or extremely limited. I mean, right now we do have Henderson and Gibson and Stevenson projected in very limitedly, but I wouldn't be surprised if by the time lock rolls around, we're getting news that 2 or 3 of these guys are in sweats and we're removing them from the projections. And then Hasty and Watts and even Bernard are all projecting for more volume. So that's something I would not be surprised at all about. And then even Gibson. I mean, it sounds like Gibson's going to be at least one of the 2 kick returners. So he's making it seem like he's going to be involved in like this running back by committee trio based on a couple of reports over the last few days. But I don't think he is fully aware of what's coming for him. I mean, I think TreVeyon Henderson is a brute force in this offense. And he's certainly going to be a guy who is going to pretty much kick Gibson out of the rotation here. But I don't think that is going to necessarily mean, Gibson's going to be playing a ton in the preseason. They know what they have with Gibson. He's still going to be a special teams guy. He's still going to play at times throughout the season. So with the Patriots playing some of their starters in the first couple of weeks and now going to a spot where they're pretty much not playing any of their key players, I think all 3 of these guys are either extremely limited or just out in general. And I think that's going to lead to good things for Hasty and more touches for Watts. I don't know if we can say that means good things for him, considering he turned those 10 carries into 15 yards last week. But, volume is still certainly key in NFL preseason.
I won't derail this conversation with the best ball discussion of TreVeyon Henderson, but suffice to say, maybe Antonio Gibson's onto something here. Maybe, nobody has crowned TreVeyon Henderson as anything as far as his usage is concerned. Yeah, he looks good, but I mean, I think we're reacting to quite a limited amount of actual production in preseason games as far as what we think he's going to be doing in the regular season. You got to be on the field to score fantasy points, Kyle, right? So it remains to be seen. It should be fun to watch who's on the right side of this ADP surge for TreVeyon Henderson. It's going to mean probably less playing time for him in this game. Final note, the Carolina Panthers at running back, we've got, probably a limited or 0 run from the starters here. So what does that leave us?
Yeah, so obviously Chu Hubbard's not going to play in this one. Their new multi-million-dollar man in the backfield. Rico Dowdle, I would also assume, is a guy who could easily be looped into the group of starters. Gave him a limited number in the projections here, but again, wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't play at all. And then, I think for this one, it kind of comes down to potentially the RB3 battle here. And the guy that I'm looking at for this week in preseason is Trevor Etienne, is a guy who we've seen already play a good chunk of snaps throughout the first 2 weeks, played 30% of snaps in week 1, 37% of snaps in week 2. That hasn't necessarily led to a ton of carries. He only has 9 carries, and he's been absolutely abysmal in that time, averaging 2.3 yards per carry. But nonetheless, he's a guy who I think that they could easily make a concerted effort to go out there and get the ball in his hands, especially if they're going to be sitting both Hubbard and Dowdle. So Etienne, I think, could easily be a tournament option. I know he does have a pretty prominent name, especially, matching his brother there and then obviously his college days, but he hasn't been good at all in the preseason so far. And I do think a couple other guys that we've mentioned, Caleb Johnson, Cam Scatabo, Turbo Miller, even Hasty, all those guys could potentially be more popular than Trevor Etienne. So I think Etienne could be one of the guys who I'm looking at least from a tournament perspective, just hoping that we can finally get some efficiency from him and then some more consistent volume. So Etienne is certainly going to be my favorite Carolina Panther, maybe one of my favorite tournament plays at the running back position today.
Going to follow in the footsteps of his brother and spend lots of times coming out of our mouth and on the fantasy football field, not producing very much for us. So the ETNs are really doing it for us here. Let's see if they can not do it again on a 2-game slate. Let's go. All right, wide receiver situation is slightly better here, but the names certainly aren't because it's preseason and that's just how it goes. So why don't you tell the people why, when you did the Carolina projection, you thought Jimmy Horn was worth discussing here on this slate? Because I don't even know if half the people know who Jimmy Horn is.
Yeah, Jimmy Horn, I believe unrelated to J.C. Horn, who is the cornerback for Carolina. But honestly, they could be related. I don't really know. But Jimmy Horn, going back to his Colorado days, playing with Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter and company, he's turned in some decent volume, I suppose, for a preseason performer. 6 targets in 2 games. Hasn't really turned that into many yards, only 16 yards, but he does have 5 catches. But the thing is, for this week, we're not going to see any of the starters here for Carolina. Dave Canales already came out and announced that Ted McMillan, David Legette, Thielen. I wouldn't even be surprised if Jalen Coker is potentially looped into that group as well of guys who sit. But even with just those 3 names being completely out of the equation, I do think Jimmy Horn is a guy who's going to be at least in line for some good volume. you do have to wonder about the potential quality of targets coming from probably Jack Plummer for the most part. Then Bryce Perkins, we talked about him being an MVP player for the UFL, but again, is he going to be the best the best passer on this slate? Probably not. So Jimmy Horn is a guy who I think is going to be out there certainly for a good amount of playing time. He's played 43% of snaps in week 1, only 22% there in week 2, but we did see again some more snaps from some veterans there. Like we saw Xavier Legette play 20% of snaps, David Moore play 50% of snaps. So I think if that's going to be a spot where those guys see a downgrade, you can potentially see Jimmy Horn get back into that 35-40% snap share range. He's a guy who I do think could be on the field quite a bit and hopefully finally get some production off of some of these targets.
I will say Coker, I think they did say he was going to play. I have to go find that quote to be sure of that. But, he's certainly somebody who, even if he played a little while, could get it done. Age-wise, he's not anywhere near out of the sphere of being eligible to play in any preseason game. And he's certainly not guaranteed to be a quote-unquote starter for this team. I think a lot of people are treating him that way and discussing him that way because he's played so well in his opportunities. And, of course, you've got an aging Adam Thielen, whom he is trying to usurp here for this particular role in the Panthers offense. So Coker is somebody that you could, in theory, pencil in as someone who's an option. I don't know if that comes with a lot of ownership or not. It depends really what the public is chattering about when it comes to the Panthers wide receiver options. I also want to just randomly mention Hunter Renfrow played 44% of snaps last week. He could play quite a bit again this week as they are trying to figure out what to do with him and whether or not he's still got it for pro football. John Giles. We talked about him and the rest of the Patriots because pretty similar to the running backs, you can start crossing names off the list pretty quickly at the Patriots wide receiver position. And I'll just rattle off the guys who did not practice on 8-19 fast. Kyle Williams, Kendrick Bourne, Jalen Polk, Efton Chisholm, Javon Baker. That's basically half their wide receiver room. Didn't even practice in their last practice, which was a pretty intense one from what I hear, which tends to make us think, well, the starters probably aren't going to play if they're having a very intense practice, the last practice before a game. It's pretty typical for coaches to think like that. Not guaranteed, but Stephon Diggs, Mario Douglas, are we going to see them? Who knows? That's going to leave us with basically 5 guys. Kyle Williams, Keyshawn Boot, John Giles, Jeremiah Webb, and possible State Farm agent Phil Lutz. Do you know who Phil Lutz is? They signed him off the street. Looks like an insurance agent or something. Kyle, what are we doing here with the Patriots wide receivers? Can we play John Giles?
Yeah, this is a spot where you typically aren't going to have a ton of great data to pull from some of these guys. I mean, John Giles is a guy who we saw I play at West Florida for the Argonauts a few months ago, so it's definitely a spot that it's tough to get a lot of analysis from these guys. Hey, this is preseason for you right there. And I think I saw he played for the a few months ago. He's on Fort Scott. Have you heard of that team? I think was
of course.
So again, it's going to be a tough sledding here for kind of analyzing some of these guys' skill sets, right? Like, I mean, this team is, like you mentioned with Phil Lutz, literally bringing guys off the streets, trying to not even necessarily find guys to make their team or to be an impact, but simply just to have bodies here for the preseason. And when you're talking about, crossing all these guys off who didn't play, and then obviously Stephon Diggs isn't going to play, be pretty surprising to see Pop Douglas play. So there's just no names here. So this is going to be the spot where you're looking at sheer volume and sheer snap counts. So, I mean, my favorite is going to be John Giles, played 47% of snaps in week 2. So I'm assuming he's going to be the leader in the clubhouse to play, increased snaps more than these other guys. And to be frank, that's pretty much all the analysis I have on John Giles. The one thing I will say about Jeremiah Webb is he is a guy who is, arguing his case to be a punt returner or a kick returner for this team. He's a guy who, at least looks to have some sort of dynamic playmaking ability based on what we've seen in the past. And again, I think that kind of translates to a guy who has been trying to make a case for being a kick returner or punt returner. So far this preseason, Jeremiah Webb has 5 targets, has caught 3 of them for 49 yards. So again, all that sort of kind of brings that back into the final equation. So Giles and Jeremiah Webb are my 2 favorite Patriots options and probably 2 of my favorite receivers on the board here. And when you look at quality of targets, Josh Dobbs, Ben Wooldridge, they've been guys who both thrown for more than 100 passing yards. in preseason so far this season. Not all pass catchers are going to be able to say that for their quarterbacks. So I think you could actually do worse, even though we don't know much about these guys. These are going to be the guys that I'm looking at this week.
In all fairness, even in a regular season game, 3 guys playing like all the snaps for a team is even pretty rare. And when those 3 guys are John Giles, Jeremiah Webb, and State Farm agent Phil Lutz, it actually kind of makes me think, okay, well, maybe Javon Baker is going to try to roll himself out there and give himself one last chance to make this team, right? I don't think any of these guys are making the team that we just talked about. Even Jeremiah Webb doesn't even have a really great shot to make the practice squad. So the reason I'm mentioning this is because, well, Keyshawn Boot and Matt Collins, they may need somebody out there with Dobbs to actually play the position and evaluate him and give him some kind of a chance at an actual, fair bit of experience here, because those guys are just really low end. There's a chance that those 2 guys could matter here. I mean, what about that angle? How are you going to play that? Because clearly we're going to be on who's in uniform watch before the game as we watch what's going on with the Patriots. Does it make any sense at all to start considering Boot and Hollins? Because, really there's nobody else here.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, again, you also have to think about, to that point, those guys necessarily aren't safe with their roles. Like, they're still trying to earn roles. I mean, Kyle Williams is trying to chase them down. Pop Douglas is obviously still there. So if these guys are active and, we get word that they're going to be playing, especially a guy like Keyshawn Boot, he could easily be a guy that pops up. For me, I do think there's probably more intrigue for, like, if one of these guys who have been DNP this week, like, randomly play, like, let's say Javon Baker ends up playing. Like, I doubt we'll see Kendrick Bourne. I don't think we'll see Kyle Williams. I mean, if that happens, he'd probably be more likely than Kendrick Bourne. But, like, let's say just one of those guys pop up and play. That would probably be the spot that I'm most intrigued in, especially if it's Javon Baker, like you mentioned. I mean, he was a guy who was getting all this hype last year and just completely fizzled out. But from all accounts, again, they still have, these guys, Giles, Webb, Lutz. I think they're certainly going to play quite a bit. But the other guys, especially these DNP players, Baker, Polk, Kyle Williams, if any of these guys play, that's probably where my most interest would be in, if one of those guys randomly pops up and ends up playing.
This has got to be a riveting conversation for anyone randomly happening talking about the worst pro football wide receivers that you can possibly be talking about.
What do you mean, Phil Lutz?
We're talking about.
Can I share the image that you sent in Slack earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this guy he's out there. We're gonna bundle our home and auto with Phil Lutz after the game. Let's go.
That's just a fantastic.
Let's get into the Pittsburgh Steelers, because we're gonna get no DK Metcalf here. We're gonna get probably not much Calvin Austin, just coming back to practice himself, right? Roman Wilson is probably the first name you can start to think about as someone who might play in the game. And it's just really a matter of how much you think he qualifies as someone who would get his playing time adjusted by the quality of the opponent versus guys deeper down the depth chart. So what are you doing here with the Steelers?
Yeah, this particular scenario is always kind of tough for me for preseason, where there's guys who are, like, on the bubble of potentially being good enough to, not play too much, but also, like, have they really proven anything? And Roman Wilson, I think, is just the ideal, image of that, right? Obviously, he's been very good this preseason. He has 4 catches for 96 yards, averaging 24 yards a catch there, 6 targets. So, I mean, Roman Wilson, we saw pretty much nothing from him last year. He was, I think, a 3rd-round pick, and he just ghosted us completely. It was probably one of the more randomly weird things that we've seen from a fairly high draft pick, at least that I can remember in recent memory. And then this year, all of a sudden, talks of him being, a really prominent part of the potential offense of the regular season. Aaron Rodgers loves him, yada, yada, yada. Calvin Austin dealing with an injury. Maybe that opens up the door for Roman Wilson a little bit more. So all those things kind of bring me to the conclusion of saying I think Roman Wilson's a guy who might be able to get there on limited playing time, but I don't know if we'll see him out there for necessarily a ton of action. But, I mean, he's demonstrated that he can certainly be highly efficient, makes a big play. So if he's going to play 37% of snaps again like he did last week, I think he's in a fantastic spot to be one of the better receiving options on the board. So I definitely don't mind taking a stab at him. He would be my favorite Steelers pass catching option. And then after him, I mean, you have a guy potentially, you have a few different options across the board here, especially with Skoranek dealing with the toe injury, didn't play last week. But Brandon Johnson played 37% of snaps last week. Robert Woods played 39% of snaps. Robert Woods, the fact that he's still dredging out there for 40% of snaps in a preseason game, got to feel bad for that guy. But it's going to be probably Roman Wilson and then Scotty Miller and Brandon Johnson for me. Brandon Johnson, for what it's worth, 5 targets, 5 catches, and a touchdown so far this season in the preseason. And then Scotty Miller also lots of production, 6 targets, 6 grabs, 85 yards. So all 3 of those guys, Miller, Johnson, and then Roman Wilson, I think all look pretty solid as potential options for the Steelers.
Kyle, how in the world does a guy get an 80-yard bomb and not score a touchdown? Because that's what happened with Bo Collins last week. I actually had him on one of my teams. It just sent me into absolute negative. Just get one more inch cut from me, guy, please. That was brutal. But Russell Wilson did throw a nice bomb. I got to admit, that was good to see. That looked like the old Russ out there in preseason. And this guy, look, I don't know for a fact that he's not going to make this team. I haven't looked at the roster projections here, but I don't see any of these other receivers as being too good for him not to usurp someone like a Zach Pascal. And there's going to be some surprises here when the roster cutdowns come. I think the question is, last week we saw Collins out there for 25% of snaps. That wasn't anywhere near the top of the team. You saw Juice Wells and Lil Jordan Humphrey. Boy, this guy just keeps doing it in preseason, doesn't he? Lil Jordan Humphrey back again. Anyway, Bo Collins, I'm not so sure he's going to get a ton of run here. He's got a prop for 20.5 yards over on the pick'em sites. That's pretty good for preseason, but it's not like, we're going to expect to see him the whole game. So what are we doing? Is Bo Collins somebody on our radar, or are there too many cooks to hear in the Giants' kitchen?
Yeah, I think the one thing about Bo Collins that I'm most intrigued by is that I think he actually has a good chance. I mean, I think all these guys do, because I think Dart's going to play a ton, but I think if there's a case to be made where some of these back end guys miss out on some Jackson Dart time, I think that would potentially hurt these guys. So guys like Cambry, maybe Juice Wells, maybe a guy like Bly. So these guys probably don't benefit from playing with Jackson Dart if he doesn't play the majority or even the full game. So Bo Collins, I do think, will play probably most, if not all, of his snaps alongside Jackson Dart, and that I think sets up really well. I mean, this is like the all-time college football DFS connection right here, Jackson Dart to Bo Collins. I mean, I can see it as clear as day on a 36-yard touchdown down the sideline. But I think that's the one thing that I would potentially give the edge for Bo Collins over some of these other guys, especially for a guy who we've already seen make a big play. I mean, we're talking about Juice Wells, who played almost 50% of the snaps last week, but he had 6 targets. He has 6 targets on the week, on the preseason, 5 targets last week, but only 13 yards. So it's like, yeah, the volume, the snaps are going to be out there certainly, but Bo Collins is a guy who profiled as somebody who would be a big time playmaker coming out of college, at least for a preseason slate, and he did that in his first preseason game last week. And I think you can also argue that the fact that he's only played one preseason game, maybe they look to get him a few extra snaps here. So yeah, Bo Collins is going to be my favorite Giants receiver. Juice Wells probably my second favorite, probably tied with Lil Jordan Humphrey there for my favorite Giants pass catchers here.
Yeah, Montreal Washington's someone that I've heard people talk about in the preseason or in the Giants camp too. Just not someone I'm overly excited about overall, but someone, again, if you're looking for guys you can't cross off the list, there you go. We've already, for a 2-game slate, we've talked about a lot of options here, Kyle. So it should be interesting from a game theory perspective. That kind of makes it a good slate, right? Like when you've got all these different ways that people could go, there's a lot of uncertainty, and it could be a lot of fun to play a little 2-game slate here on a Thursday night, which I mentioned fun just before we switched to the tight end screen. And oh boy, that's not so much fun. So what are we doing here?
Yeah, I mean, here to be completely honest, I'm mostly trying to just pair tight ends with quarterbacks, and even that can be difficult. Obviously, in the regular season, that's pretty easy because you just kind of play, you just finish out some stacks with quarterbacks with tight ends on the same team. But here you have to consider the fact that, hey, are these guys even going to play with that quarterback, et cetera. So for that reason, for us, we're projecting Jackson Dart to get the most playing time out of any quarterback. So for that reason, I'm going to have most interest in these Giants tight ends. They also are our top 2 projected guys here. I mean, Dulcich is a guy who we've seen make plays in the regular season. Fedone is a guy in college we've seen make some plays, so I don't mind either of those guys. And then I'm just kind of following the projections here. James Mitchell, Carolina tight ends are a little bit potentially weak here with Sanders, and obviously Tremble's out, but Sanders likely to sit. After that, you have a mix of guys who are either just not guys who profile as pass catchers or guys who just aren't really going to play very consistent snaps. So James Mitchell is going to be my favorite Carolina option. Also, don't mind Mitchell Evans there, former Notre Dame tight end who's been a pretty good producer in the passing game at Notre Dame in previous years. So don't mind taking shots there. So those are probably the two tight end rooms I like the most here. The Patriots have the most potential guys out for them, but I mean, it's just a mess to figure out who's going to benefit there. I mean, I think it was 2 years ago when Jaheim Bell first came into the league. He was a guy that I kind of rung the bell for as a potential preseason guy because he played running back at South Carolina. I haven't really seen him do much. G. Scott, former Ohio State tight end, he has made some plays in college. Dippery from Alabama. So there's some guys on New England, but for me, Carolina and the Giants are probably the tight end rooms I'm looking at the most.
Yeah, if we were smart, we would have done like pro wrestling like ring entrances to try to make this more exciting, like Cole Fotheringham. He's one of the Patriots you mentioned before. He's got a chance to make the team. Maybe he's someone that you could look at here, but we got to come up with a in-ring persona for him or something so that we can really get people excited about clicking Cole Fotheringham. Jesus. All right, so bottom line, tight end's pretty ugly. When you say the top tight end projection, we're talking 2 fantasy points, Kyle, is what we're talking about here. Anyone's in play. That sounds like a cop-out. It's not. It's like there's just, as of this moment, we can't cross enough guys off the list anywhere to say, okay, this guy's absolutely excellent. You got to go with this guy. Fedone and Dulcich are players for the Giants that make more sense than some of the other options here, but realistically, it's pretty garbage. Especially, with the Steelers, maybe you might like to see Jonnu and Freemuth out there because certainly they are going to step on the field. I do think that that's something that's going to happen. Like I said, all healthy players need to prepare to play. Jonnu's missed some time. Certainly they're going to get him a couple of reps, but how many reps is that going to be? That could be something that you can consider as well because, again, nobody here is really guaranteed to score even 1 fantasy point. So getting into the defenses, Kyle, I don't even think it has to be said. You can play any of them, but if you liked one more than the other ones, where would you lean?
Yep, like you mentioned, you can play any of them. Last week I talked about if you have a lineup with without a bunch of guys, or like, let's say you have several Giants players, you probably don't want to use the Patriots defense in that time in that lineup, but you still can. It's just, I guess, if you're looking for rules or rhymes or reasons to play these defenses, again, I will default to some of these Vegas numbers. The Patriots are 6.5 point underdogs against the Giants in game with a 37.5 point total. So they're probably pretty equal in terms of an implied points allowed projection from Vegas as the Panthers, who are 5.5 point underdogs in the game with a 35.5 implied total. So for that reason, I probably like the Giants and the Steelers a little bit more. And then after that, you can kind of create your own tiebreaker with the Panthers and the Patriots there.
All right, folks, that's going to do it for this 2-game slate here in week number 3 of the preseason. It's almost time. We got to get ready. Week 1's just around the corner. Only a couple more days of Phil Lutz and Cole Fotheringham. We're about to get into the big dogs. So for Kyle Murray, I'm Chris Gimino. We'll be back for week 1 of the regular season here at RotoGrinders.com. Best of luck in your contests.